Welcome to the Think Christian podcast, where we talk about faith and pop culture, because there's no such thing as secular. I'm Josh Larson, here in 2025, but still looking back at 2024. A few weeks ago, we discussed the best TV of the previous 12 months. On this show, we're going to talk about our favorite music of 2024. Now, Kendrick Lamar threw in a surprise album at the end of the year, luckily for us. Claude will be here to break that one down. Sarah Welch Larson is going to help us catch up with an album that defined the summer, Charli XCX's Brat. And then Aarik Danielson will be on hand to discuss an EP release from a TC favorite, Bon Iver. So those are all good folks with a nice variety of music. Let's get to it. I've got three friends joining me for this Best Music of 2024 episode: Claude, Aarik Danielson, and Sarah Welch Larson. We're here to discuss a year in which Taylor Swift and Beyoncé both released new albums, but neither are going to come up on this show. That doesn't mean we're not fans of that work. To be fair, three of our other friends, Catherine Freeman, Rosalind Hernandez, and Abiel Chessie, they listed Beyonce's Cowboy Carter among their picks when they were helping us plan these best of shows, and we were kind of throwing our favorites out against the wall. So definitely some love for Cowboy Carter, and a handful of listeners actually did write in naming Swift's Tortured Poets Department as their favorite album of 2024. Overall, though, I think it's fair to say there was something of an underwhelming response to those two releases compared to the anticipation in the culture in general. And it makes me wonder something I wanted to ask the three of you as we get into this reflection on the state of music in 2024 going into 2025. Do you think last year was something of a passing of the torch from these music titans like Taylor, like Beyoncé, to newer talent? Aarik, you're the official music critic on this panel, so I'm going to start here. What's your take on that, looking back at 2024?
Well, you're going to love this, Josh. I'm going to say yes and no.
Wonderful.
As far as the passing, I do think there is some. I was thinking about this. There's the great music writer Stephen Hayden on his podcast, IndieCast, talks about the idea that like a decade of music never really shapes up in the first few years. You know, the first couple years of a decade still kind of sound like the last decade. There's kind of this transition period. And he's actually talked about how like the fourth year in a decade often feels like kind of a pivotal year. And to me, I think there's something to that. The idea that maybe in 2024, we're really starting to see what the 2020s are actually going to be musically. And I do think there's like kind of a somewhat of a torch handoff happening. I would say though, with like all of the multimedia stuff and like the film, like the Eras Tour film and all the stuff that like Taylor and Beyonce did that wasn't actually on a record, I feel like their cultural impact is still huge.
Yeah.
I just wonder if it's almost kind of like in a weird way transcended music now to where it's like people are really experiencing them elsewhere rather than, I mean, their streaming numbers are still pretty great, but like maybe there's kind of more happening there. So I don't know. I feel like there definitely is a transition in the works, but what that's going to shake out to look like, I think we'll probably know maybe this year or, you know, in the next couple of years. So
yeah, I like that framework. And actually to describe them both that way as transcending rather than, you know, falling behind is true. They've gotten too big in a way to just be tied down to the music. Claude, what do you think about all this?
I think that's really helpful what Aarik is pointing out. I also think about it on a broader level. I think we're also, you know, with time, we just see the passing of eras and there's sort of this evolution. And so I think this could also be connected to some other cultural icons and phenomenons. I'm thinking about, you know, as a sports fan, the sports mortality of LeBron James and Steph Curry, and sort of just this realization that I had earlier this year of just sort of like people that have grown up enjoying, you know, their artistry, their craft, even as athletes, they're kind of coming to an end. And so I was thinking about that in terms of Beyonce and Taylor Swift. It's a little bit different, as Aarik has mentioned, in terms of their kind of multimedia, you know, icons. And so that continues, but our relationship to their music does shift and evolve over time. I do expect with them, they'll continue to, you know, as they age, they'll continue to make music that reflects these different stages of their lives, which is really neat. But that does bring them maybe in some ways out of kind of the zeitgeist of maybe what the younger folks, so to speak, however you want to define that, might be listening to. So I've thought about it on a broader level, just sort of like there is this little bit of a changing of the guard that I'm seeing in athletics for particular icons. And I think in some senses can connect to this conversation on some of these pop icons too.
And I like that comparison too, because it works as they're all at a pinnacle right now. It feels like, you know, for Beyonce and Taylor Swift. And then, you know, if you caught the Olympics with Steph and LeBron playing in that gold medal game, being at the absolute pinnacle of their talents as well. But you do look ahead and it feels like it's going to be different for all of them in the coming years. What do you think about this, Sarah? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it feels less like a passing of a torch and more like a sea change, I think. It's funny, when we were driving back from spending Christmas with family a couple of weeks ago, my husband and I saw a car that had a vanity license plate that said TTPD on it. And then, just in case you didn't get the reference, it also had a license plate frame that said Taylor's version underneath it. I have so many questions about that car. Shout out to whoever that is. I appreciate them very much. I do feel like the fans of Taylor Swift and the fans of Beyoncé definitely will still have a lot more, but it doesn't feel so much as though they're kind of dropping off in cultural relevance as it is more people are having like slightly more splintered views of how that culture is being consumed. And I do also think that it's worth noting that Charli XCX, Sabrina Carpenter, and Chappell Roan have all been in the music industry for a very long time. In some cases, it's their 6th album that was their breakout album. So it's also not so much young blood as it is people starting to really come into their own and hopefully kind of start to reach that same pinnacle and those heights that Taylor and Beyoncé have also reached too.
And that brings us right to our pick, Sarah, because I think all three of the artists who you guys chose to highlight from 2024, they've been around a bit. They, like Beyoncé and Taylor Swift, they're accomplished and yet still vital, absolutely vital. That's, one of the reasons why you guys wanted to bring them to this conversation. Let's go back to you, Claude, to start looking at our picks. And you wanted to talk about Kendrick Lamar, who certainly did not have a quiet 2024. There was the ongoing music-fueled feud with Drake, then the surprise release of GNX in November, and Lamar's carrying that energy into 2025. He's got a headlining performance ahead at the Super Bowl. I think 7 nominations at the upcoming Grammys, a tour with SZA. So talking about someone who's, I don't know if it is a pinnacle, we'll have to hear from you, Claude, but certainly having a moment right now, it's Kendrick Lamar. And you are my go-to scholar, so I'm going to start with a dumb question and let you school me, Claude, here. When I've listened to Kendrick Lamar in the past, and usually it's been while editing a piece you've written for Think Christian on him, I felt this serious responsibility to, study it deeply. My brow is furrowed. I'm taking in all the lyrics and the music is coming at me. Listening to GNX, it was kind of fun. And that feels like maybe the wrong reaction to have. So I don't know. Tell me, and more importantly, tell me how you responded to it.
I think that really encapsulates GNX as an album. He captures the sound of the hit. That's also the Drake disc, Not Like Us. It's that same West Coast sound throughout the album. So it's certainly more playful. It's more accessible. It's not as layered as, his other critically acclaimed album, say, To Pimp a Butterfly. It's a little bit more like his previous album, Damn, which again, had some levels of depth. The people on Reddit have their theories, listen to the album in reverse and you'll get the second meaning and all that sort of stuff. People really love that with Kendrick. But also at the same time, he can slide into that kind of pop lane and be a little bit more playful, give you some of those radio hits, some of those summer hits, some of the music that's just great to listen to, while you're working out at the gym or driving past the speed limit on a summer day. He can do all of that. And I think GNX really does represent this sort of, we talked about with Taylor and Beyoncé, we'll probably look at it as like a pop pinnacle for Kendrick. I don't know how you could engineer in a lab a better year for an artist than what he's had. He's slayed his enemy musically. We could, that could be discussed. He's climbed the charts and he's praised, for his skill and his ability to make hits. So I think GNX definitely has that. I think for fans of Kendrick who like more of the introspective, kind of complex, furrow your brows, decipher the lyrics carefully, listen 7 times before you really get it. There's some songs like that. There's a song on the album where you don't know who it's about, and then you find out, oh, it's not about a relationship. It's about his connection to his music and his pen, So you've got those sort of things, but at the same time, it's much more accessible, radio friendly in that sense. And I think it's part of why it's been so well received.
You touched on something, Claude, that I think is key, at least to my response to it. When you said you couldn't engineer the year he had, I feel like, going back to Beyoncé and Taylor Swift, their past couple of years have felt so immaculately engineered, and for the good. Like, their concert tours have been amazing, but it seems all meticulously planned out. And maybe Kendrick Lamar has been putting this sort of planning into it as well. But when it comes born out of a feud, it feels more spontaneous, some of it. And just a surprise album is part of that too. So yeah, listening, it does not feel engineered in a similar way. And I think that's the playfulness, accessible. Are those words that resonated with you, Sarah, when you listened to GNX?
Playful, yes. Accessible, I'm still on that third or fourth listen, so I haven't quite hit that 7 listens and I fully understand it. But I really love the richness of the lyrics that he's bringing. It's just something where I kind of just feel awash in the music and am not yet at the point where I can interpret it necessarily, but very much appreciate the level of artistry that he's bringing to the table.
Yeah, you gave this a listen too, right, Aarik?
Yeah, absolutely. This is easily in my top 5 from this past year. I think one of the things I appreciated in addition to all the stuff that Claude articulated is just how California this record is. I mean, you talked about the West Coast sound, but there's really beautiful Spanish language singing that kind of bookends the record. I mean, I guess this stuff has always had a lot of LA and Compton references, but a lot of LA references. And it really does feel almost I feel like it's a very self-revealing record too, where it feels like he's almost kind of opening the door up a little bit to hey, this is just kind of the guy that I am. And I want to kind of get past the myths a little bit. As someone who's really appreciated his stuff, it did feel like a really fun kind of look into more of what's going on kind of in his process and where he comes from.
So something more specific I wanted to ask you about, Claude, when it comes to GNX is this idea of reincarnation that pops up at least twice on the album. There's a reference to it in one of the most entertaining songs, Squabble Up, as well as a song titled Reincarnated. And I think Reincarnated is actually where there's also a reference to Isaiah 14. So now we're getting more into the territory, I think, of digging into those layers. Maybe you can at least get us started, point us in a direction of what's kind of going on here with this interest in the idea of reincarnation that we see.
Yeah, I think one of the themes through Kendrick's music is this kind of continuity with the past and ancestry and heritage and community. It's definitely a big theme on Mr. Morale, his previous album. I mean, the album is basically him. He went to therapy and he's trying to sort of excise and exercise generational trauma and demons, so to speak, right? And there's sort of songs where he's huffing and that's sort of simulating the shedding of skin and becoming a new creature, a new creation. So he's very interested in these sort of ideas. And I think this idea of reincarnation is very much related to sort of how does the past impinge on the present. And he has a couple of lines on the album where he touches on this. And I think this is a good example of kind of Kendrick's nature as an artist on even Squabble Up and Whacked Out Murals, the first songs where he's a little bit more playful and also a little bit more braggadocious and aggressive. He's still hinting at these themes, right? So he has a line in Whacked Out Murals where he says, old soul, I probably built those pyramids, right? This sort of, he's hinting at these ideas. Then later he delves in more deeply for an entire song. He actually does that several places throughout the album where he sort of shows his hand and then goes deeper later. I think on Reincarnated specifically, it's a sample of a Tupac record. And Kendrick is very, again, being a California guy, is very obsessed with Tupac. At the end of To Pimp a Butterfly, he has a kind of a fake dialogue with Tupac that people at the time I think thought was a little bit cringy. But now, Kendrick can do no wrong, right? So, so he can get away with it. He samples Tupac on Reincarnated. He raps like Tupac for the first verse. I think it's Kendrick's way of continuing to explore how does the suffering of the past affect Black people particularly, but all people universally. He's very, very interested with this question. And even on this song, he has this sort of interrogation that happens where he's asking, look what I've done with all that I've earned, right? Has it been enough? And he's processing that. And I think those themes of reincarnation, the themes of the past and the present, trauma and memory, I think Kendrick is behind all of the sort of bragging and the boasting and the disses. I think he's somebody who's sort of grappling with his role and his debt and responsibility to his community and how he can live up to that. And has he made his people proud as he stewarded the gifts that he's been given and the platform that he has? I think he's very, very conscious of those questions. And I think if you listen carefully, or even just listen a little bit, I think it emerges behind all the disses and all those things. That's the sort of question that he's really fascinated with. And I think, to me, one important aspect of the theme of reincarnation, healing and stewardship, and what we owe to our past and how we carry that forward into the future.
So yeah, an album GNX that maybe at first glance seems or sounds like an easier listen, but so many layers. Before we move on to Sarah's pick, anything else you wanted to bring up about GNX, Claude? Or otherwise, maybe you can just tell us your favorite song from it.
I mean, my favorite song is probably Whacked Out Murals and Reincarnated. TV Off is fun and has created a lot of memes, so that's a good one too. So that's great. We talk a lot about, as believers, a sort of, we're simultaneously sinner and saint. And I think that is the key for Kendrick's music. He knows he's vanquished his enemy, Drake, and yet before the album came out, he had a song called Watch the Party Die, where he's basically asking, what would Jesus have done in this situation? By asking, what would Lecrae, the most well-known Christian rapper, what would he have done in this situation? He has this sense that I killed it in the beef, but certainly there's a better way. And so I think a real key to Kendrick's music is this wrestling between sinner and saint. And I think because of that, he's deeply relatable. So a really compelling album, I think.
All right. And a lot more, as I said, to come from Kendrick Lamar this year. All right, Sarah, I'm excited about this one. Your pick is Charli XCX's Brat, which came out in June, kind of took over the summer. And you had talked to me then. We were at a screening, ran into each other at a screening, and you talked to me about writing something. I had also heard from other TC writers who were interested, but the stars never fully aligned for us to pull that off. Honestly, there was some skepticism about, okay, is there a TC angle here in Brat? So now's your chance. Tell us why Brat is one of your favorite albums of 2024 and why it might be of particular interest to TC listeners.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of my pitch has to do with a lot of the reasons why GNX works so well as well. So, Claude, you kind of set me up for success here because Brat is also a very playful and also very aggressive album, albeit in a very different genre, kind of that four on the floor, like dance music. We're going to get out and we're going to sweat everything out. And the thing that really works for me about Brat is the level of confidence and then also vulnerability that are kind of being balanced against each other, often in the same line, quite often in the same song, all the way throughout the album. And it's kind of a testament to the strength of the songwriting and to the production that this is an album with so much on its mind, and yet it still manages to have such a straightforward laser focus on what's important, even as it's thinking about questions about, am I good enough? Fame, everything that has been sort of thrust upon me that I really wanted, but now that I have it, do I really actually want that level of scrutiny? And I think the thing that I keep coming back to with Brat is that yes, it's very aggressive. Yes, it's very like, look at what I've managed to earn, but it's also very vulnerable about all of the weaknesses that Charli feels that she has, that she feels have been exposed by that same level of fame. And rather than trying to cover over that vulnerability, she just owns up to it. And then she's able to be in dialogue both with herself and then with other musical interlocutors, both within the original album and then also in the remix album, which I will argue is also terrific. So there's a lot going on there, and I'm delighted that we get to live in a world where we get that kind of album, where it also just feels good to like go out and dance to. I have Von Dutch on my running playlist, and it's a very motivating song.
Would you say that's your favorite, or between that and the remix, maybe there's a remix song you like better?
Oh man, I mean, the remix song that I like the most, I can't remember if it's the exact like first remix because she started releasing remixes even before the album first came out, but there is a song on the original album called Girl So Confusing that the internet immediately sussed out was about Charli's relationship with the singer Lorde. And she never explicitly name drops her in the original song, but she talks about how the two of them are basically completely different people, but they think that they should be able to get along, and yet at the same time, they're not really sure how real that relationship is, and I kind of want to see you fail and you kind of want to see me fail. And 2 weeks after the album came out, Charli and Lorde dropped a remix that acknowledged, yes, this is a song about our relationship. Yes, we're going to work it out on that remix. And so that remix is my favorite because it kind of brings the full story full circle. I have no idea if they did the remix in just the 2 weeks or if it was pre-planned. It feels a little bit more spontaneous than that, but at the same time, you never know. So that's probably my favorite off the remix album. The entire album is very much worth it. And then my favorite off the original version is probably Apple, which I believe it was one of the other singles. And that is deceptively simple because it's just talking about apples falling from trees, but it's also about kind of this acknowledgement of the sin and the brokenness that permeates our lives and the people who came before us and the people who are going to come after us. And Charli acknowledges that brokenness. There's a great line about, I think the apple's rotten right to the core from all the things passed down from all the apples coming before. And that's so simple, and it is so effective. And it also just makes me want to get up and dance while I'm saying it out loud. It's really hard to just say that line instead of singing it. So beautiful display of, I think, vulnerability and then honesty about where that brokenness comes from and recognition that she's not going to be able to fix it herself, but maybe if she's a little bit more vulnerable about it, then there's a possibility for healing there. Or at least it certainly seems like that in the performance with the Lorde remix especially.
Nice. So Aarik, we were talking a little bit before we started recording. You're less Brat Summer and more Brat remix, right? You really like that?
Sarah and I were talking about this sort of on Blue Sky today. I think I'm Brat remix winter. Is that a thing?
Yes.
I think that might be what I am.
I like it.
But no, I've spent time with both. I really like the remix record just because there is such a cool energy that Charli XCX brings to everything, and the way that she kind of trades that energy off with all the guests that she brings in is really cool. Sarah said everything so well about the record. I don't really have anything to add other than I really, from a songwriting perspective, I mean, we all know that words and phrases get repeated in songs, but I really like really purposeful repetition and even like kind of like tweaking a phrase, the second or third time around to kind of make you hear it differently. And I feel like she does that a lot on her stuff. And so just from like a subtle craft perspective, I think there's some really cool things going on lyrically that you might miss, because the music is so fun and because there's such a blast of fresh air running through. But a couple times through the remix album, I kind of was picking up on that and really enjoyed just what she's doing from a songwriting perspective.
And that's something that she's doing on the original album as well. So there's a song on the original album called So I, which is about her relationship with the producer and musician Sophie, who passed away a few years ago and who had also produced some of Charli's own work. And So I is kind of picking up and sampling a little bit one of Sophie's songs, It's Okay to Cry. And she even like alludes to that in the chorus of the song where she talks about like, you would say that it's okay to cry, so I cry and I cry and I cry. And just kind of picking up that thread and running with it while also acknowledging what has come before her as well.
Yeah, that one really took me by surprise, having not much background with Charli XCX, despite seeing her at Lollapalooza a couple summers ago, just, didn't
Jealous.
intend to, but I was there for the day and we're like, oh, of course. So caught a couple songs there. But yeah, had more of the general perception of her and her music. And that song particularly stood out as like, there's a lot going on here and a lot of thoughtfulness. So glad for the excuse to spend more time with her music. Let's go back to you, Aarik. We've got to get to your pick yet. It's a little bit different in terms of genre, I would say, and even format. This is an EP from Bon Iver founder and band leader Justin Vernon. The 3-song collection is called Sable. And Aarik, back in 2019, you wrote about the Bon Iver album I, for us here at TC, and you shared this. In Vernon, we, meaning Christians, find a kindred spirit, someone enamored with being alive. His awe should inspire our own. So I'm curious from your perspective if you think Vernon is still that sort of kindred spirit here on Sable.
Yeah. Oh, I do want to point out that it is a 4-track EP. There's like 8 seconds of noise at the beginning that he made his own track rather than just bleed it into the second track. So let's just, set that record straight. Yeah, I think so. And I think it's just a different side of that coin on Sable. Justin Vernon, very famously, one of the kind of signature Bon Iver songs is the song Holocene, where he says, and at once I knew I was not magnificent. And I feel like that's kind of such a great kind of mission statement for what so much of his music has been. It's just kind of been, he's from Wisconsin. He writes a lot about nature and about being in the woods and kind of just like realizing how small you are in comparison to everything. And I think on Sable, he's still enamored with this world, but he sounds to me, and I looked this up because I thought he was several years younger than me. He's only like a year younger than me. I think I feel very similar to what he's doing on this record. Like he seems like the kind of person who at this point is kind of asking like, how do I make the second half of my life better than the first or mean something different than the first? And so I think where he, feels like life is bigger than him, in these songs of great awe, I think now he's looking at life and saying, okay, how do I really be introspective? How do I look inside rather than outside? How do I work out the things that are holding me back from really experiencing everything that life has to offer? And we can talk about some of them if we want, but like there are so many great lyrics on this little EP where he seems to be really working out in real time. Like, here are the mistakes that I'm making. Here are the ways that I've believed my own hype. Here are the ways that I've done these things that have really held me back from fully experiencing all these beautiful things that I sing about. How can I deal with that? How can I work that out? How can I be better on this end of things than I was before? And so I do think he wants to get at those same things, but I think it's more of like investigating the self on this EP rather than saying like, I'm just going to stand and stare at what's beautiful. Rather, it's more like a gaze inward to say like, okay, how do I kind of shake off some of the stuff that's keeping me from really enjoying what my life can be?
Yeah, give us some of those lyrics if you have them handy in a sense, because that's a huge part of his music.
Well, and one of the interesting things about this record, people have made fun of this. I tend to be like, this EP came out and people said, oh, it's the return back to the acoustic sound. It's the return back to, for Emma. I've always been more of the like, I like that record, but I like the weirdo spiritual mysticism of, more recent Bon Iver. And some of those lyrics are very inscrutable. You don't hear them sung, you read them on paper and go, this either makes no sense or it's one of the cringier things I've ever heard. And then you hear him sing it and you go, well, actually, that sounds pretty good. I kind of appreciate the vibe. This record, the lyrics are much more straightforward, although you still hear him kind of like doing this strange, like, maybe if I get in the middle of this phrase, I can really figure it out. So on the song, Things Behind Things Beyond Things, he talks about like, I get caught looking in the mirror on the regular, and what I see there resembles some competitor. And then later in that song, I love, he works this phrase a couple times. He says, I got caught compiling my own news. Just the idea that like he has kind of filled his own head with myths about himself and who he should be and what his art should be like. And now he's saying, no, I can't believe the things I've said to myself. I need to actually see what's real. I go back and forth between whether that song, I know there's only 4 choices and really only 3, but whether that song or the song Awards Season is my favorite. And that's the closing track. And on Awards Season, it's kind of a longer passage, but he says, "Oh, how everything can change in such a small time frame. You can be remade, you can live again. What was pain's now gained, a new path gets laid, and you know what's great? Nothing stays the same." And so there's this idea that he is a person in process, that he is a person who is working it out, that he is still in a state of becoming. And I think, whatever people believe, I know listeners of this podcast are inclined to think about the world through a Christian lens. But I think for anybody, that idea that like we are always in the process of becoming, we have not yet become who we're going to be. And I think Vernon is really wrestling with that on this record and saying, if I really believe all this stuff that I've been singing about all these years, I have to actually kind of deal with my own stuff and not just what's going on in the external world. So I just really appreciate it. There's so many lyrics like that. Again, he and I are kind of in a similar life stage. I can't help but kind of like interpret all of that through my own experience. But there's this sense of like, okay, if I'm going to like do this for real for the next 25, 30, 35 years, what does that look like? How do I start to just get rid of kind of the cobwebs inside? That really resonates with me. And I think that could appeal to a lot of people depending on where they're at.
Speaking of that, like meaningful repetition of the same word over and over again, that idea of things behind things behind things, rings within rings within rings. I think the way that I had been interpreting that had been a much more pessimistic way. And so I love that you bring that up as we're people who are always in the process of becoming and kind of in that state of grace. Not to bring it back to Charli, but there is a line where she talks about like, when you're in the mirror, do you like what you see? And I think that that's directed both at the listener and then also kind of conversely at herself. And it also feels pretty simpatico with one of the verses in Reincarnation where Kendrick is talking about some of his past lives and looking back on everything that he's had to go through in order to become the person that he is today, too. So just kind of beautifully ties everything together.
I don't know if you can see this, but I'm making a full circle that Sarah just did. With that.
Look at really Sarah bringing us to a close here by tying it all together. I love it. I'm not going to let you go, though. That was a lot of good music talk, but I do want to get some bonus picks, let's call them. This is the music episode, but of course, we previously did our best of TV episode, and in a couple of weeks, we'll have our best movies of 2024 show. So tell me what picks you guys might have in both or just one of those categories. You got something for us, Claude?
Go to me last. I have to think for a second. I was actually going to pull up our document. I'm like, what did I do in 2024?
There's a lot of good,
so
there's a lot of good stuff in there you can pull from. All right, let's stick with you, Sarah.
Let's keep the house music party going. One of my favorite movies from last year was Challengers, Luca Guadagnino's Challengers, which has an incredible score and probably my favorite script from last year. And speaking of very broken people who are all trying to figure it out, just interesting characters who are all terrible humans. And yet I love them all so much. I love that movie. And I think I saw it 4 times last year, and I will absolutely be watching it again.
That is so funny because this came up on our Film Spotting Top 10 Roundtable. I think we had someone call in saying they listened to it like 4 times as well. And another person 8 times. Mm-hmm. It's the only movie on my top 10 I've seen twice because I don't know, there's just something, you're right, as much as those characters are emotional chaos agents.
Yes.
You kind of are just drawn to their drama and can't resist. So yeah, I agree with you on all of that. The score, the screenplay, and the movie itself, if people have not yet seen it. Challengers, it's good stuff. What do you want to give us here, Aarik?
I'm always way behind you guys on TV and film, and I think how many years in a row have I brought up if my rewatch of Twin Peaks counts? But I will say, one of the
you can't do that anymore.
I know, no, there's a moratorium at this point. One of the art forms, though, that we don't talk about a lot on here, and that still is really meaningful to me, is stand-up comedy. There's been a lot of stand-up specials this year that I've really loved. There are a few that have definitely escaped me, but I really loved Mike Birbiglia's special from earlier in the year. Seth Meyers just put one out that's actually really great on parenthood, on fatherhood in the last couple of months. I also really like kind of a younger guy named Langston Kerman that does some really great work. So I don't know, that to me continues to be one of the like truly underrated like forms of storytelling that we have, is just being able to hold an audience for an hour and work all of these ideas in and out of the same story. So a lot of times when I've really experienced a lot of meaningful storytelling this year, it's been just watching somebody prowl the stage with a mic. It's been great.
Man, that is how we've been getting through these cold, dark, early weeks of 2025 is comedy specials for sure. One from a while back, though, but last year, I would recommend as well is Adam Sandler, Love You, a Netflix special, which is, I know Sandler can be, people are like, come on, I imagine, but this is an interesting deconstruction of the stand-up special. You could watch it and not realize that, but then you realize how much of this has probably been planned, and it's really fascinating that front, especially if you're a fan of the genre. The director of it actually is Josh Safdie,
Oh, wow.
of the Safdie brothers who made Uncut Gems. So you've got some interesting stuff going on there. It's Adam Sandler, Love You.
One more, if I can. I couldn't think of his name for a second. I had to
Claude
look it
needs
up.
more time. I can see it on his face.
Yeah.
This, I can't remember. I think this was 2024. If not, it certainly won awards last year. Alex Edelman's special, he's a young Jewish stand-up who actually tells a story. It's an unbelievable story of just deciding kind of on a lark that he was going to show up at a white supremacy gathering in somebody's home in like Brooklyn or Queens, somewhere in New York, and basically kind of try to infiltrate and see what it was about. It's one of the most hilarious and also just like anxiety-inducing hours that I've spent in a long time, but he does it so well. He pulls it off. He makes it funny. There's just some incredible moments in that one. So I would also recommend, if people haven't seen the Alex Edelman special, to check that out.
All right. Lots of good stuff. You're up, Claude.
Okay, I'm ready. I remember 2024. So on the movie front, Dune 2 was probably the big one for me. So I enjoyed that. Yeah, I thought that was captivating and great movie experience. On the TV front, connected to Kendrick and the West Coast theme, the Vince Staples show has one episode in particular called, I think it's The Brown Family or Brown Family. And it has a lot of themes connected to our conversation with Kendrick of sort of like your relationship to family and your ancestry and your community and your obligations there. It's quite powerful and also quite hilarious. I don't think the show as a whole, the other episodes, I don't think they quite deliver, but that episode in particular is really good. And then if I could just slide in one more music pick, Jess Ray has an album called Matins that's really wonderful singer-songwriter. Worship music for people who may not like worship music is probably how I describe it. It's really wonderful, in particular the song Humble Heart. So wanted to make sure she got a shout out on the TC pod because that's only fitting.
Nice. Yeah, Vince Staples show. I know that's another one we had talked about maybe doing something last year.
That's right.
It didn't come around, but glad you had a chance to give it some attention here. So thanks for all of that and your music picks, of course. Before we do officially sign off, maybe tell listeners where they can follow you in 2025. We heard that Sarah and Aarik are busy on Blue Sky, so join us there. Claude, are you there? I know you're active on Threads.
Yeah, I'm more active on Threads. I do exist on Blue Sky and I do exist on X, but I'm only active on Threads, and I sadly have to say very few people follow me there. But that's okay. If you need more Steph Curry content and random things that, leadership tips, I'm just kidding. That's where I am.
All right. And Aarik, besides Blue Sky, where will you be at this year?
The two main places that I'm posting at the moment, as I kind of cringed thinking about this, is Blue Sky and Instagram. I'm still on Twitter /X/ whatever you want to call it. I developed kind of these social media liturgies that I didn't mean to develop over the years, where like I post poetry on Mondays and art on Sunday nights and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I'm still doing that on X, but I'm not really posting anything original. So Blue Sky and Instagram are the two places that would be best to find me.
There you go. And how about you, Sarah?
I'm off Twitter, but I am on Blue Sky. So you can follow me there. And I also co-write the Seeing and Believing newsletter with Kevin McLenithan. And we just released our top 10 movies list of the year just this afternoon as of recording.
You did? Yeah. Said before we started, it's in my inbox. Going to get to it right after we're done here. So thank you for that. Thanks to all of you for this conversation, and looking forward to having a bunch more in 2025.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
With music and TV accounted for, that means our next and our last episode in this Best of 2024 series is going to be about movies. Now, this is something of a spoiler, but I figure it's worth mentioning the titles that we're going to discuss. That way you can catch these films in advance of the show. So we'll be talking about The Substance. This is a Hollywood set body horror starring Demi Moore. It's available at Mubi or for rent via streaming services. We'll also be discussing Rebel Ridge, a corrupt cop thriller that is on Netflix. And then our third film will be Conclave, the Vatican set drama. It's kind of a thriller too, actually. This one's on Peacock, but it might come back to theaters if it gets some Oscar nominations on January 17th. So look for that Best Movies of 2024 episode to be out about the end of the month. Now, if you'd like to connect with us on social media, probably Instagram is the best place to do it these days. Just look for Think Christian. You'll find clips from our episodes as well as posts and videos drawn from our articles over at thinkchristian.net. If you'd like to email us, Your comments are always welcome that way. Just send those notes to tcpodcast@thinkchristian.net. And if you have a few kind words to share about the show, we'd love it if you would leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Give us a new one to start the year out right. Star ratings are great, but it's those reviews that really do help us reach new listeners. For those of you watching on YouTube, you can help us out a couple of ways. Subscribe, hit that like button, leave us a comment. Thanks in advance for doing that. The TC Podcast is a listener and donor-supported production of Reframe Ministries, a family of programs designed to help you see your whole life reframed by God's gospel story. Visit reframeministries.org for more information. Our audio engineer and post-production supervisor is John Reeder. I'm Josh Larson. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to celebrate the best movies of 2024 as we continue to connect our pop culture fandom with our faith.